We've been now exclusively from outside the courthouse in Sanford is Benjamin Crump. He's the attorney for the Martin family. Ben Crump, thanks for joining me again. What do you make of the jury so far, out 3 and a bit hours, asking for a lot of documentation, clearly prepared to go through a lot of evidence, it would seem?
Well, Piers, what I think is going on, they are looking at the evidence, and we've always believed if they looked at the evidence that they will hold George Zimmerman accountable for killing an unarmed teenager. We've always said there's overwhelming evidence to hold him accountable for killing Trayvon because he got out of his car and he profiled and pursued and chased an unarmed teenage kid.
Now, one of the more dramatic moments today was when Marco Mera for the defence showed a picture of Trayvon Martin alive and then held up his autopsy photograph. Let's listen to what happened there.
2 months, 3 months before Trayvon Martin passed away, that's what he looked like. He lost half his blood, we know that. So on that picture that we have of him on the medical examiner's table, yeah, he does look emaciated. But here's him 3 months before that night. So it's in evidence. Take a look at it. Because this is the person, and this is the person who George Zimmerman encountered that night.
What did you make of that, Ben Crump? Because he was clearly trying to create an impression to the jury that Trayvon Martin wasn't just a kid, he was a quite strapping teenager.
Well, what's interesting about that, Piers, it was extremely emotional, especially for Trayvon's mother. It was at that point where she became very emotional and actually had to excuse herself from the courtroom. You know, Marco Mera said in his closing summation that you should not use presumptions to convict the innocent when referring to his client George Zimmerman. But isn't that exactly what George Zimmerman did that night when he profiled and made assumptions about Trayvon Martin and was wrong, and unfortunately Trayvon had to pay with his life?
There was a moment where Marco Mera turned his attention to you personally. This was an interview with Martin Savage, who I spoke to earlier. This is a clip from that interview where he talks about you.
Do you think that George Zimmerman would have even been charged had Ben Crump not been pulled into this?
No. Ben Crump or someone like him, because had Ben Crump not gotten involved in the case, maybe for some good reasons to begin with. If he believed that there was something here that was being swept under the rug, then get on into it. I'm very okay with that.
But you didn't quite say it that way. You made it sound like it was Ben Crump, George Zimmerman would be free at this time, and we would not be in a trial.
That's correct. I think that it was a made-up story for purposes that had nothing to do with George Zimmerman, and that they victimized him. They complain about Trayvon Martin being victimized. George Zimmerman was victimized by a publicity campaign to smear him, to call him a racist when he wasn't, and to call him a murderer when he wasn't.
Ben Crump, your reaction to that?
Well, Piers, you know, they seem to forget that Trayvon Martin was a dead, unarmed kid on the ground who his client profiled, followed, pursued, and shot in the heart. The only thing that brought us into the matter is when they told Trayvon's father that they were not going to arrest the killer of his unarmed son, who only had a bag of Skittles and a can of iced tea, walking home from the 7-Eleven, doing everything he legally had the right to do. So what do you tell parents like Tracy and Sabrina, whose child only was trying to walk home and was profiled for whatever reason? We don't know if George Zimmerman was a racist or not, but we do know he profiled Trayvon Martin for some reason and got out of that car with a 9mm gun and pursued him. And so if we would not have gotten involved, as Tracy Martin told me when I first talked to him, they said they're not going to do anything about it. And I didn't believe that, Piers. I did not believe that as a lawyer. I said, hold on, let me make sure I get these facts right. Because I know that they will arrest certain people on a hypothesis. They had evidence of a kid dead, a confessed killer, and they weren't going to arrest them. That's something wrong with that. That's why so many people signed those petitions, over 2 million people. They said you can't kill an unarmed kid and not even be arrested.
Ben Crump, I mean, obviously the jury are out now, so you can speak relatively freely in that sense. What do you think is the most likely verdict? Many people think that the case for second-degree murder hasn't quite been met by the state, but that there's a pretty compelling argument for a manslaughter conviction. Do you agree with that?
Well, I'll say it like this. I will quote Prosecutor John Guy today, who I think he has said that I had said this previously. If Trayvon Martin was in the car and profiling and falling and pursued George Zimmerman and killed him, what would the verdict be?
Ben Crump, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.